Hello, everyone. It's Richard again here on the channel Calvin Wazoo. And today I'm going to continue with a series that I had started earlier called The Albums of My Decades. And I'm really deviating from that original theme because I'm not in a decade again yet. I began with the decade of my birth year, or I should say my birth year, 1958, and then I went to 1968, but I've been kind of stuck in the 70s since then, so I haven't gone a full 10 years. And today we're going to be talking about 1976, which was the year I graduated high school, and it was also the year that I entered university. And that was pretty important, the part of going to college, because college is a great time. It's a time when you are exposed to a lot of new things, and that included music and bands and musical styles that I hadn't really been listening to until I got to college. So that's what I'm going to start off with first, are artists, musical artists, and releases from 1976 that I really didn't hear about or listen to until the fall when I started to attend university. Okay, we're going to start off with this one, Jeff Beck, Wired. Um, Released in 1976, but like I had mentioned, it wasn't until I got to college that I began listening to Jeff Beck, that I heard him. Super great album. In fact, there were a lot of what I would say are the jazz fusion groups and artists that I was exposed to for the first time. So there was Jeff Beck, there was Chick Corea, Billy Cobham, Larry Coryell. There were a lot of artists that I had no exposure to until I got to college. Another band that I learned about my freshman year semester, the first semester, is this one, Starcastle. I'd never heard of them before until I started attending university. And needless to say, at that time I was a Michigan resident, and a few of the folks on my floor were people from Illinois. And Starcastle comes from Illinois, from the Champaign Urbana era. So they're a progressive band that, would be in this style of Yes, for example. And I really enjoyed it. It took me years. I had a few of their albums, but it took me years afterward until I started recollecting again before I managed to find albums by Starcastle and then put them back into my collection. Now, as I mentioned, there were jazz fusion artists that I was being exposed to during my fall semester as a freshman in 1976. And Stanley Clarke, School Days, this was one. And I bought it that year. I played this a lot. I mean, this is just a fantastic album. Really, really fine chops on the bass. Just really incredible. I really enjoyed that album. At the time, however, I really hated this one. And I've told this story before in a previous video, but it's largely because, as I was moving into my dorm room across the hall, this guy was playing this album over and over and over again. When the needle got to the end of the record, he would pick it up and start over again. He wouldn't even flip the album. So yeah, I really hated Boston for decades. It was only, I would say, within the last 2 to 3 years that I thought, maybe I'll give them a chance, give them a listen. And, I kind of enjoy it now. Still not one of my favorites, but I can tolerate listening to it on occasion. I will get in a mood and I will want to listen to it. Also, at this time, again, roughly while I was in college, well, you know what? I may have bought this while I was still at home, my final semester in high school, or maybe that summer, but Imaginary Voyage, Jean-Luc Ponty. And I knew about Jean-Luc Ponty through his association with Frank Zappa. And so I took a chance and got one of his solo albums. Brilliant stuff. I really, really enjoy it. Now, moving outside of quote unquote college era albums, and that's when I was first started listening to them. Other albums released that year included this Greatest Hits album by James Taylor. And of course, it's got his greatest hits, that's why they call it that. And there's some good stuff. I mean, there's Fire and Rain, Carolina in My Mind, something in the way she moves, Mexico, how sweet it is. Just lots and lots of great songs. I did have the great good fortune, in it would be the mid 1980s. I had gone to the Telluride Bluegrass Festival in Telluride, Colorado, and he was one of the headliners during the many, many, many shows that were going on at that festival. Really great experience to see him perform live. It was really awesome. Now, someone that I did not learn about until the 80s when he came out with another album, but this was his debut in 1976, Warren Zevon, the eponymous titled album. And I didn't really know about Warren Zevon until the album Excitable Boy was released. And he was the one time that I've been to a Grateful Dead show that had an opening act. Every other Grateful Dead show I went to, there was no opening act. The Dead started, they came out and played, there would be 2, maybe even 3 sets. But they had Warren Zevon come out and open, and I pulled the album out, just to go over some of the songs that were on here. For example, there's the song Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, which was a hit for Linda Ronstadt. And when you're looking at the credits, Warren Zevon played with a lot of great musicians. They would flock to play with him. And so you see people like, Bobby Keys, Lindsey Buckingham, Waddy Wachtel. Recognize that name? Guitar player, Waddy Wachtel? Think about that for a minute and maybe it'll come to mind with whom he's associated. Jackson Browne appears on here. There's a lot of songs with Waddy Wachtel on here. So he played with a lot of other big musicians, big stars, and great studio musicians. He got around, and he produced a lot of good material. So if you're not familiar with Warren Zevon, or your familiarity is limited to the record Excitable Boy, check these other records out because you'll be pleasantly surprised. Now, I was already a big Joe Walsh fan because of the albums The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get, and Barnstorm. But came out that year was this, You Can't Argue with a Sick Mind, and I got the Japanese pressing of it. Cool OBI. I know there are people have mixed feelings about Japanese pressings. I like them. Part of the criticism that people have with Japanese pressings is that they are not the original mixes necessarily. They get remixed for the quote-unquote Japanese audience, which is a very urban audience, very dense population. People live very close together. So they take a bit of the bass out of the recording so that, doesn't interfere with neighbors and things like that, which I don't necessarily mind because I live in Chicago in a high rise. So my stereo, even at low volumes, that bass can be pretty strong. So I don't mind that. But I honestly don't notice that removal of the bass level that much with the Japanese pressings that I do have. In general, I think they are superior to most, not all, but most European and US pressings. This is a weird one. The Residents, Third Reich and Roll. Yeah, at the time I didn't know anything about, I had never heard of the Residents. And I didn't hear about them until, again, this would have been, well, early 80s when I had moved from Michigan to Arizona and was living in Tucson. A friend told me about the Residents and said, oh man, because he knew I was a Zappa fan. He knew that my taste in music was a little bit twisted. And so he suggested that I should check out the Residents. Well, even at that time, I did not. I did not check out the Residents at all. In fact, until just 2 years ago. And man, I have been missing out on a lot. Now, this one, as I say, this is weird, okay? A critic at the time when this was released wrote that it was both funny and frightening. Not sure if that, what kind of an endorsement that is. So we got the swastikas that are on this particular side. It's definitely a concept album, like all of the Residents material is predominantly. Side one is called Swastikas on Parade. And that was actually recorded in 1974, and it was prompted by a short video that the band did in which they plastered newspapers all over their studio, and then they would dress in costumes made of newspapers. And so they created this video. And then what they did for side one is they take all these snippets of pop songs, commercial jingles, and things like that. And then that's what they put together for the entire side. So some of these snippets of songs, and you may not necessarily recognize them because they really do bizarre things with them. But there's things like the side begins with "Let's Twist Again," but it's sung in German. They have the Hanky Panky. There's a snippet of Horse with No Name. The Letter, Psychotic Reaction. Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, which is also sung in German. Even To Sir with Love and Wipeout. Okay, so then on side two, which is called Hitler Was a Vegetarian, that was recorded in 1975. And the same thing, it's got these snippets of songs, some of which are simultaneously being played, so they might not be immediately recognizable. But some of the songs that they are snipping, so to speak, include 96 Tears, It's My Party, Light My Fire, Gloria, Inagata Davida, Sunshine of Your Love, Hey Jude, and Sympathy for the Devil. That's just some of them, not all of them, on the side. So, yeah, this is some pretty interesting material. It's out there, and it might not be quite for everyone. Now, many of these next albums may have been released in 1976, but I was not listening to them at the time. And some of them definitely are ones that I was listening to at the time. But one of them that I was not listening to is Lou Reed's Coney Island Baby. I knew about the album, but I didn't have a whole lot of interest in it. until I read some information that suggested that if it weren't for Steve, is it Steve Miller? Now I'm drawing a blank. But the great guitar player that toured with him and is playing guitar on Rock and Roll Animal and Lou Reed Live, that if it weren't for that connection, there was a speculation that this album would not have been possible. That look at that guitarist, and you know, darn it, I've got to go find the album to remember the guy's name. Steve Hunter. You should look him up too. Really good guitarist. So yeah, the speculation was if it weren't for Steve Hunter touring with Lou Reed at that time, the direction Lou Reed eventually went in, starting with Coney Island Baby, might not ever materialize. So there were some people who were giving Steve Hunter a lot of credit for the blossoming of Lou Reed's career post that era. Now, in general, I'm a pretty big prog rock fan, but I had never heard of Nectar. And this album, A Tab in the Ocean, was released in 1976. And but I'd never heard of it. And then I saw some other vloggers talking about this when they were talking about psychedelic rock. And the name kind of intrigued me, A Tab in the Ocean. Psychedelic music. Tab. It took me a while to find a copy, but I did. And I really do enjoy it. It's great prog rock, psych rock. It's very, very enjoyable. In fact, I may end up listening to this later today. Now, you know already, or should know by now, that I am a very big, let me see if I could do this when I'm something behind me. Okay, there it is. Yeah, Frank Zappa. Big Zappa fan. So I remember buying this when I was in college that first semester, Zoot Allures. And it did come out in 1976. Some interesting information about this album. All right, so of the people on the cover, two of them they're not even on the album. And that would be Patrick O'Hearn and Eddie Jobson. I believe this is Patrick O'Hearn, and I believe this is Eddie Jobson. But this is Terry Bossio, who appears on here, and then, of course, Frank. Now, the touring band that went out that same year did, in fact, include O'Hearn and Jobson. But here they are on the album cover, and they're not on the album. Other interesting bits here. See this right here, okay? Now, that is called a hanko, which is a seal, Japanese seal for documents, okay? So it's like, stamp it on a document to make it official. And kind of like a signature, I guess. Now, the characters here are read from, unlike with Western languages that are read from left to right, this is read from right to left. And they translate as miscellaneous leaves. Doesn't make a lot of sense. However, the characters are pronounced Zappa. Okay? Now, on the back side, we have some other characters. All right? Now, these characters were actually put on a nameplate that was on Zappa's dressing room while he was in Japan touring. And this is a kanji, all right? This is called hanko, and this is called kanji, and in this case, it's read from left to right. And when you, again, the translation is no confusion, distress, miscellaneous groups. You know, what? But again, when we talk about the pronunciation, it's pronounced Furanku Zappa. Now, both of these, the nameplate that wound up on Zappa's dressing room door and the Hanku stamp were presented to Frank after a concert in Kyoto. It was February 4th, 1976. So very cool little bit of trivia, going on with that album. All right, gonna breeze through these final ones. Albums released in 1976. Jackson Browne, The Pretender. Another, as I mentioned, he was someone who played with Warren Zevon. Jackson Browne also would get lots of different people to record with him. So, and this is a MoFi recording. It's a cutout, so I got it pretty cheap. But a great album, The Pretender. Great song, The Pretender. One that also came out while I was graduating high school. At that time, I didn't listen to a lot of ELO, but certainly was familiar with the songs. Very cool label on here. And there were some ones that definitely I remember from my high school days in that summer. Living Thing, Do Ya, and Shangri-La. I mean, these were all really big hits on the radio, on FM radio, and were played all the time. And then we've got AC/DC, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. While I listened to AC/DC and liked their music, I never owned any records by them, again, until the last couple of years. And I was kind of reinvestigating my musical roots in terms of my musical taste. So, great rocker. And this one, the first time I heard this was after I graduated, and I was hanging out with some friends that lived in another town, graduated high school, and this was on the radio, station to station. And the song that was being played on the radio at that time was, Golden Years. And I heard it on the radio and I was like, whoa, this was such a wonderful release by Bowie, because kind of after Aladdin Sane, there was Diamond Dogs, and there wasn't a lot of material that he was necessarily releasing. There was the live show at the Tower in Philadelphia, I think it was. I didn't get that because I just didn't like what he was doing with some of the songs on that particular tour. But when this came out, this just renewed my faith in David Bowie. He's been one of my favorite musical artists forever. Getting down to the end here, we got Hotel California, the Eagles. I remember listening to this a lot that summer after I graduated high school, and I was never much of an Eagles fan, before this. And it was Joe Walsh, Joe Walsh reinvigorated. He brought new life to the Eagles. And I actually think he inspired them for their post-Eagles career with the music they made then, I think was much better than anything they really did, other than the first Eagles album. I mean, the first Eagles album, you should own that. But this was one that came out in 1976. And then the last one, Bob Dylan, Desire. And I just remember the song The Hurricane on the radio all the time. And it was just a fascinating song to me. I didn't get the album again until much later, but I do remember it being on the air all the time and really making an impression on me. About 1978, I would say 79, is when I actually got a copy and began listening to the other songs and just listening to the rich, vivid storytelling that was going on with the songs in this album. A really, really great album to have if you like anything by Bob Dylan. So those are the albums that I own that were released in 1976. Obviously, there were a lot of others that I wish I had. It was a good year for music, but I have not acquired them, but will eventually. So what are some of the albums from your year of graduation from high school or your freshman year at university? The ones that you remember and made an impression on you? You know, leave a comment. And don't forget, down in the by the Down Under, you can subscribe to the channel. Please like the video if you do, share it. And always remember, when you're listening to your music, be sure to enjoy your music.